Hey everybody, welcome to Lunch with California Common Cause, our weekly or sort of weekly opportunity to chat with our members and others interested in building a better and more inclusive California democracy. I'm Jonathan Mehta-Stein, the Executive Director at California Common Cause. We're behind, the election is past us, or the election is behind us. We are out of the weeds on our poll monitoring work and our election protection work. But the election feels very much with us simultaneously because of all of the lawsuits that continue across the country that theoretically at least leave our election results in dispute. How much are they actually in dispute? How settled is this election, and how worried should all of us be about the will of the people actually being carried forward? We're going to talk about that today with a wonderful guest who's joining us from the national team at California Common Cause. Quickly though, before we get there, if you want an update on California Common Cause's poll monitoring work and what we did in the 5 Southern California counties where we visited 1,200 voting sites on Election Day and in the early vote period, please check out last week's episode of this live stream, either on our Facebook page or our YouTube page. I gave a solo update about the poll monitoring work, what we found, what we saw in each county, what our lessons learned were, and some broader reflections about how California's elections are evolving and what that means for voters. Our next step on that work is to complete a report about our experience with observations about what happened, and again, macro level conclusions and recommendations for the administration of California's elections in the future. Look for that in 2021. If you're interested in the sort of reports that we do with our poll monitoring, the data that we collect through our poll monitoring, you can go on our website at commoncause.org/CA, and you can find our March 2020 report, which was a deep dive on LA County's administration of the March 2020 primary, which had lots and lots of bumps, and we diagnosed all of that. The other thing I want to mention before we get to our fabulous guest is that state and local redistricting are coming up / are here now. After the census and after election 2020, there's a third part to sort of the three-legged civic engagement stool, and that's redistricting. So in California, the Citizens Redistricting Commission, the statewide commission, is meeting today. It's meeting almost every single week now to begin the business of a redistricting commission. It's figuring out who is our Voting Rights Act counsel going to be? Who is our demographer going to be? How are we going to hire they just hired a communications director as an example. They're getting trained up on a variety of things. They're planning an outreach plan so they can reach all of California's communities, no matter where they live or what language they speak or whatever the case may be. So that's the work that's happening now at the state level. And you should expect that commissioners will be out in the community speaking at public events, trying to beat the drum around state level redistricting work in January and February. And so look for an event near you, or I guess on a Zoom screen in your home, in which the Citizens Redistricting Commission members try to go into the community and make redistricting feel real and help people get engaged with the process. And at some point in 2021, local redistricting will ramp up as well. In some places it already is. So if you're interested in how the districts are drawn for your local school board, your city council, your county board of supervisors, all of that is coming, and you can make your voice heard in all of that. Common Cause will be deeply embedded in redistricting work at the state and local levels. And we hope to have a huge package of resources for community members who want to get educated about redistricting and want to get involved. So look for that in the coming year. Okay, to our guest today. Our guest is Sylvia Albert, Director of Voting and Elections at Common Cause in our national office. Sylvia brings more than a decade of professional experience in public interest law and public policy campaigns, expanding ballot access, hi Sylvia, reducing barriers to participation, and combating voter intimidation among historically disenfranchised communities. Sylvia has also done extensive work on fair housing issues, serving as a program analyst and advisor to the Assistant Secretary for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity in the Obama administration. Sylvia is a Cal Bear, just like me and my brother and my cousins. We are a big Cal family over here, and she has a JD from Georgetown University. Sylvia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, you are exactly the person we need to talk to because despite the fact that the election is behind us, the news every single day are filled with Trump lawsuit in Pennsylvania, Trump lawsuit in Michigan, Trump lawsuit in Georgia. And I don't think our viewers and the regular members of the public have a sense of how seriously they're supposed to take any of those lawsuits or all of those lawsuits and what sort of threat they pose to the will of the people actually being enacted. So let's start with the most basic question. What do our viewers need to know about all of this litigation being brought forward by the Trump campaign?
So I think the first thing to know is, and I'm going to steal a line from Justin Levitt, who's a well-known election person, that a lawsuit is simply a tweet with a filing fee. There is the fact that somebody filed a lawsuit is no indication whatsoever that there's anything real within any of their lawsuits. And in this particular instance, I can say, having reviewed every single lawsuit that has been presented by President Trump and right-wing voter suppressing groups, there is not a single piece of actual evidence in them to indicate any problems with the election.
Okay, so do our viewers need to know the specifics of a lawsuit in Michigan versus a lawsuit in Georgia versus a lawsuit in Arizona?
You know, you really don't, and that's partly because they are literally copying and pasting the same nonsensical legal theory from one lawsuit to another, and then it's getting tossed in one state, and so they are, voluntarily dismissing the lawsuits in the other state. I think you can know basically that they are alleging that there were improprieties with the election, but they have not produced a single piece of evidence, and that's the most important thing, right? Like, if a lawsuit can go for a lawsuit to go forward, you have to show a judge something, and since they haven't been able to, their suits aren't going anywhere.
Yeah, so that's the question. If none of these are legitimate, are they losing consistently in different courts?
Yes. So as of today, I believe they are 25-1, or 1-25.
1-25.
Yeah. So they've lost 25 suits. The only cases that have, I will say, a small, tiny little bit of actual legal theory behind them are in Pennsylvania, but those are related to such a small number of ballots that regardless of what happened, it would not change the election results.
Right. I think so. They won one lawsuit in Pennsylvania, and what we know is that not enough votes were in dispute in that lawsuit to turn Pennsylvania. And theoretically, even if Pennsylvania were to turn, which it won't, it's not enough electoral votes to change the outcome of the Electoral College. Now, I want to actually ask about, so there is the silly season stuff. I mean, some of these really dramatic claims to voter fraud that are based in literally nothing. And if you read some of the transcripts, the judges treat these with sort of the disdain that they're actually, they deserve. But there are sort of, requests for recounts and stuff like that that is a little bit more common. You see them in like sort of, I think Wisconsin has had recounts in several of the most recent presidential elections. Can you just say a little bit about whether or not recounts are going to be occurring, or if they've already occurred, and what our viewers should know about that fact or that phenomenon?
Sure. So just like anything else, recounts are very specific to state law. So in some states will define, a recount will automatically happen if the difference between the two candidates is within, half a percentage or 1% or whatnot. And then some states, it says, well, if it's beyond that, the candidate can ask for it, but then the candidate has to pay for it. And then in other states, once it gets to be, a certain distance between the two candidates, there's no mechanism for a recount, because at that point, there's no rational thought behind it. So what we are seeing right now is the Trump campaign is requesting a recount in Wisconsin in certain communities, non-surprisingly communities of Black and brown voters. In Wisconsin, there is an automatic recount provision, but the President Trump is losing Wisconsin by more than that percentage. So in Wisconsin is one of those states where if it's more than that percentage, you can ask. And so the president is asking for a recount there, and because he is asking for it, he has to pay for it, and it's about $8 million. But what it should be, understood is that recounts are there to pick up kind of small, tiny errors with paper counting or just human error, because none of us are perfect and something small happens. No recount in Wisconsin's history has ever amounted to the change of more than 1 to 200, votes. So there might be some under or over votes that are able to be deciphered using by hand or something, but recounts are just to make sure kind of like all the computers worked and everything worked in the right way, but they don't change the outcome of the election.
Got it. Got it. What about the, and I'm now just running through every headline that might give our viewers a certain amount of fear about the will of the people being overturned here. What about the investigation into voter fraud that Attorney General William Barr has authorized at DOJ? So earlier this month, Attorney General Barr authorized the DOJ, U.S. attorneys, and the director of the FBI to pursue investigations of voter fraud and irregularities in vote tabulation. What does that mean, and what are its implications?
Well, so what that means is simply that the Department of Justice is a political arm for the Trump campaign. And that's something that we have not seen at least in my lifetime. And that's why there has been a longstanding policy in Department of Justice to not be engaged in anything having to do with elections right up to the election and through the inauguration. So basically, similar to the lawsuits, the Attorney General is going on a fishing expedition for the Trump campaign, but again, nobody has found anything, right? There are always, the couple instances of issues that we have seen this year, just like always, somebody tried to vote twice, somebody voted their dead mother's ballot. But those are so minute. And the fact that we can find those people within, 170 million people voting, we found those 2 people who did something wrong, tells me the system is working and it's finding the problems.
That's
so
right.
There is no evidence of anything widespread. These people are going to go digging, looking for gold, and they're not going to find anything.
Right. So in an election with, 160, 170 million votes cast, there are bound to be some isolated cases of fraud. And then these investigations find them and play them up in a way that gives credence to the idea that there is widespread problems when in fact that's not true. I think that most people who observe DOJ closely feel as though this is essentially a PR stunt designed to placate the president and sow doubt in the outcome of the election. So if none of these, if those investigations aren't turning anything up, and for the record, a number of counties and states have already done audits and they've already done investigations into their own counts prior to the AG and his folks doing whatever they're going to do. And they found no meaningful amount of sort of irregularities or fraud. If those investigations aren't going to turn anything up, and these Trump lawsuits are 1 for 25 and they're losing faster than they can file, and why are they doing this? And why are so many Republicans going along with it?
Oh, this is kind of the sad part of our political system. It's all about money and power. Both the Republican Party and the Trump campaign are using this as a fundraising opportunity. The president is sending out emails to his supporters, supposedly saying that he's fundraising for this litigation. But if you look at the fine print, it's actually not going to litigation. It's going to a new PAC that he just started this week, which will funnel into him having events and funnel into his family's corporations, as many of his past fundraising efforts have led to. A Republican senator very clearly stated that they want the president engaged for the runoff in Georgia in January. So really, it's about as much fundraising as possible and maintaining power in the Senate. And nobody wants to, they recognize that the president still, even though he did not win re-election, has a lot of sway with a large number of voters, and they don't want those voters turning against them.
Right. Yeah. The President Trump may no longer be in office, but he is a major power center in the GOP for years to come, and everyone wants to stay in his good graces, right? You mentioned the 2 Senate candidates in Georgia who are in the January 5th runoff. They're attacking the Republican Secretary of State who, by the way, insists that the election was held fairly and the count in Georgia is accurate. And that's because they want the president to hold rallies in Georgia, tweet his support of their campaigns and so on. They don't want to incur his wrath and hurt their standing among his supporters. And all the other senators, including Mitch McConnell, I mean, why are they going along with this when they know, the game is up? They don't want to get primaried in 2022 by an angry Trump base who thinks that they were soft on the president, right? And when Mike Pompeo was like, we're going to transition to a second Trump administration, which I think he meant as a joke. He said it with a smile on his face, though it's not a joking matter. Mike Pompeo wants to be president someday. I mean, these are all people with their own political aspirations, and they all need to stay in the good graces of the new power center of the GOP, and that's sort of Trump and Trumpism.
And I think you can clearly see that by dividing the people who have actually congratulated President-elect Biden and recognized the outcome of the election. They are people who may be Republican, but whose political futures are not tied to the president because they are, they're retiring, or like Mitt Romney, they've already separated from the president. So those people have clearly shown that, that Democrat or Republican, you can recognize what's right in front of you when you don't have a vested interest in the president not being mad at you.
Yeah, that's right. And we should be really clear. Common Cause, Sylvia and I are all nonpartisan. We have nothing against the Republican Party inherently. It's simply that there is one side of this presidential campaign that is refusing to accept the will of the people and is deeply damaging, I think, sort of the integrity of our elections in the process. And there are Republicans who are willing to call that out, absolutely, and more power to them. So what about the sort of nightmare scenario that our most obsessive followers are aware of, which is the electors? Could Republican state legislatures decide to set aside the popular vote in their state and send Trump-Pence electors to the Electoral College?
Oh, so I know legal scholars like to go down these kind of like tiny winding roads that could lead to like insane places. And so in a theoretical way, is this something that is written down on paper that could somehow one day go this way? Maybe, but in reality, it's not actually ever going to happen. The legislative bodies in multiple states have come out and said they would not even attempt to do that. The Electoral College Act says that a state can choose how it allocates its electors, but it has to make that choice before the election. So they can't go changing the rules now, right? The rules are the electors are sent based on popular vote. In order for that not to happen, the election would have to be failed. How can you prove a failed election when you're in court and you can't even prove one instance of any sort of improprieties? So because there's no evidence or facts to back up any problems with the election, just like those legal arguments can't go forward in court, neither can the arguments around the electoral college. And just kind of remind everybody, for those of you who are alive 20 years ago, there was a lot of talk about this in Bush in Florida in 2000, and it was much ado about nothing then as well. Again, we're policy wonks and lawyers like to opine things, but that doesn't mean that anything's actually going to happen.
I love the idea that potentially we have viewers who weren't alive 20 years ago. Like we have some really, really excited teenagers who are like, I need my fix of Common Cause updates every Wednesday at noon. I love it. It's really important to emphasize how unbelievably infinitesimally small the chances of this happening are, right? So first of all, state and local elections officials have certified the vote. Then that vote has been challenged in court, and those challenges have been knocked down. So you've got elections officials that have certified the count as legitimate, then you've got courts that have certified the count as legitimate, and somehow you're asking then state legislatures to ignore all of that, to replace the will of the people with Trump-Pence electors, and then somehow escape litigation that would inevitably flow if they were to try it, right? I mean, it's just not likely to happen. I mean, there is no such thing as too insane anymore, but this is just too insane. And you were right to call out the fact that Republican leadership in states like Arizona, states like Pennsylvania have really already said, we're not going to do this, folks. Like we're gonna honor the vote of the people in our state. Okay, so if we're not seeing a coup, I mean, we're not seeing the our democracy is withstanding the stress test. That's not to say there isn't damage being done along the way. That is to say, sorry, I'll rephrase my question. I apologize for being inarticulate, but it seems very clear now that President-elect Biden will be president starting January 20th of 2021. But just because that's going to happen doesn't mean that there's damage being done along the way. Can you say more about what that damage is?
That's absolutely true. A democracy is basically only as strong as its elections, and as the losers recognizing their loss and walking away, right? What we're seeing right now, and polls are showing that a large amount of Trump voters believe that he won the election. And again, this is with no evidence whatsoever, but just based on the idea that we have in our past had a way of being of a president, that this person was upstanding and they spoke truthfully, and that they led. And so when this president speaks untruthfully, there's just kind of a built-in dynamic of we believe the president, right? And so all of these people really do believe him. And what that definitely worries me. The transfer of power, is, like I said, the number one hallmark of a strong democracy. And I think what we're worried about seeing is less and less engagement in the future, because if people don't think that the election was real, then why should they go out and vote the next time around? And it's, of course, undermining, President-elect Biden's opportunities to lead the country in January.
Right. Yeah. It's just enormous damage is being done to the credibility of our elections and to our democratic institutions, and people are going to lose faith.
Yeah. Not and just internationally. We cannot overstate the damage that that this is doing to our kind of standing internationally. International observers have always been in the U.S. for elections, but never before at the level that they were this year. And the U.S. always likes to see itself as the shining, as the what is it? Something shining on the hill. There's a phrase. And we have often, pushed for democracy around the world when it hasn't been winning, and all of those places are looking at us with just kind of, wait, you're not practicing what you preach.
Right. So we have to find a way now to reaffirm the public's faith in their vote, in our voting process, and the idea that the will of the people prevails. I will say, for what it's worth, I'm super conscious, and given your background, you're super conscious of the fact that for lots of communities in the United States, they've never had a particularly strong faith in the democratic process, right? Immigrant communities, communities of color, a lot of voters have felt that democracy excludes them as often as it includes them, or more often excludes them. So, we're seeing damage to the validity of democratic institutions that in some communities have a very poor reputation to begin with. But if we're trying to reaffirm for people that their vote matters, and I mean people on the left and the right, we don't want to see lower turnout among anyone because people feel as though the 2020 election was rigged, and so why turn out in 2022? What are the right messages for this moment, right? What is common cause messaging to the public, and what should all of us be saying between now and inauguration?
I think the number one message, and to reiterate, is, the people choose their representatives. Their representatives don't get to choose the people. So what you're seeing right now is somebody trying to choose the people that get to vote for them, and it's not working. And that is, as much as we are seeing, as much as we feel that weakens us, it is also displaying the strength of a democracy that somebody in as much power as the president is unable to do that. I think, what we see is that these amazing advances that happened this year, and again, as you said, there was still just huge hurdles for communities of color, for communities with disabilities, for non-English speaking communities. They always had huge hurdles, and they continue to have huge hurdles to voting. But when access was expanded this year, we saw turnout skyrocket, and that's amazing. So, regardless of what party you were from, right? Couldn't you say both parties won in some way this election cycle? And both parties won because turnout was high and because voters, were actually demonstrating their will. And it is, and I completely understand people who feel sometimes when they say that, oh, that candidate doesn't represent, all of my views. To which my response is, I have never had a candidate represent me. I am a Middle Eastern woman from Los Angeles. I've never had a candidate represent all of my views and my, my history and my feelings for the future. But the only way to move candidates in that direction is to vote.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's really important that folks emphasize a positive narrative, emphasize our values, emphasize that we have held elections through the worst of times, through the Civil War, through the Great Depression, through prior pandemics, through world wars, and we've always accepted the election results. We've always had a peaceful transfer of power. And I think it's important to not chase the president's claims on Twitter, don't engage with specific cases of voter fraud or irregularities. It only gives credence to the idea that in fact those irregularities are widespread. Don't repeat accusations, even to refute them. Stay on message about sort of the will of the people working. You mentioned that we had record voter turnout, frankly, on both sides. We did that amongst a pandemic or amid a pandemic, right? I mean, America has a lot to be proud of in terms of democracy working in 2020, as much as it feels like our democracy is broken. Just a lot to digest. And for years, we will be digesting 2020. I mean, oh God.
Just like we digested 2000, we're still talking about it 20 years later. So
yeah, that's
at
right.
2040, I'll see you back here.
That's right. We'll live stream again, and those teenagers will be my age. We are thankful to you, Sylvia, for joining us and for sharing your expertise. And thank you for all the work that you do at National Common Cause. Folks, thank you for listening and watching us. We are going to transition this live stream to once a month for the foreseeable future. We banged them out every week through election season and most of 2020, but we're ready for a break. And so we'll join you in mid-December and again in mid-January, and then we'll pick things back up a little bit in 2021. We want to really wish you a happy holidays and some rest after a grueling election season that seemed to go on forever. For more regular updates on our work, you can follow us on social media. You can follow our organization on Twitter at Common Cause CA. You can follow Sylvia on Twitter at the Sylvia Albert. You can follow me on Twitter at _Jonathan Stein. And of course, you can follow us on Facebook, though you're watching this on Facebook Live, so I think you know how to do that. As always, we appreciate you and your support of Common Cause. Thank you for being with us in this fight. Please stay safe out there, wear your mask, and we'll see you next month.